This is Richard Radio. My wife Julia was a teacher at the elementary school. Our daughter, Leela, was 6 years old, full of energy and questions. We had a dog named Max who was more family than pet. Life was simple. Mornings were for coffee and the newspaper. Evenings were for walks and laughter. Weekends were for picnics in the park or lazy afternoons reading books under the old oak tree. But then, the warning started. It began with whispers on the news, something about unusual solar activity, strange readings from satellites. Most people didn't pay much attention, but my friend Mark, a retired engineer, called me one evening. Something's not right. The readings are off. The government's not saying much, but I think we should be ready. Ready for what? I asked. He didn't know, but he suggested we prepare just in case. So we did. Mark, Julia, Lila, and I, along with a few friends, Sarah, Tom, Emma, and their kids, started gathering supplies. We found an old mine on the edge of town, deep enough to be safe if things got bad. We stocked it with food, water, blankets, and a few comforts, books, a guitar, and a battery-powered radio. The last day above ground was a blur. The heat was unbearable. The air felt thick, like breathing through a wet towel. We worked until we dropped, sweating through our clothes, drinking water by the gallon. When we finally sealed the door behind us, we were exhausted, but relieved. That night, we watched the sun set for the last time. The sky turned a strange, fiery orange. Then the world went dark, but not in the way you'd expect. The next morning, the sun didn't rise. Not in the usual way, at least. The sky stayed a dull, eerie gray. The temperature outside climbed higher and higher. By noon, it was 64 degrees Celsius, 147 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the mine, it was a steady 29 degrees. Not exactly cool, but livable. We listened to the radio, but most stations were silent. The ones that weren't talked about a classified military blackout. They called it the Dark Sky Protocol. No one knew exactly what it meant, but it was clear. Something had gone wrong with the atmosphere. The sun's rays were too strong, the air too hot. The world above was becoming uninhabitable. We hunkered down. Mark kept track of supplies. Sarah and Emma handled meals. Tom was in charge of ventilation, making sure we got enough air without letting in too much heat or smoke. Julia and Lila kept spirits up with stories and games. Max, our dog, was confused but happy to be with us. Days blurred together. We lost track of time. The only way we knew it was night was by the clock. We rigged up blackout curtains in our sleeping area, but it wasn't the same as real darkness. Sometimes we heard stories from above. A few people made it to caves or basements. Others weren't so lucky. The heat was relentless. The landscape was scorched. Trees were gone. Everything that could burn had. We had our share of close calls. One day, smoke started coming through the vents. We had to seal them off, which made the air stuffy, but it was better than choking. Despite it all, we held on. We reminded ourselves every day that we were the lucky ones. We had time to prepare. We had a place to go. Living underground wasn't easy, but we found ways to keep our spirits up. Lila asked the wildest questions, like why the sky was blue, or where the moon went. I didn't always have the answers, but her curiosity kept me on my toes. We developed a routine. Mornings started with a quick check-in. Mark gave us updates on supplies. Sarah and Emma made breakfast. Tom checked the vents. Julia and Lila read stories or played games. Max napped in the corner. We took turns cooking, cleaning, and keeping watch. We played cards, told jokes, and shared memories. Sometimes we sang. I played the guitar and everyone joined in. It wasn't much, but it was something. The hardest part was the lack of night. I always preferred the dark, the quiet. Now it was just endless daylight outside. We missed the stars, the moon, the cool night air. Sometimes we heard messages on the radio. A few survivors were out there, broadcasting from basements or caves. We listened to their stories, their warnings, their hopes. We sent messages back, letting them know we were alive. One day we heard a distress call. A family was trapped in a burning building, unable to get out. There was nothing we could do to help. We listened, hearts breaking, as their voices faded into static. That night, we held each other a little tighter. We reminded ourselves how lucky we were to be together, to be safe.
As the weeks passed, the world above grew quieter. The radio stations went silent, one by one. The heat was unrelenting. The landscape was scorched. Trees were gone. Grass was gone. Everything that could burn had. We heard stories of people trying to survive in the ruins of cities, searching for water, for shade, for hope. Some made it to underground shelters like ours. Others didn't. We rationed our supplies carefully. We ate simple meals, canned vegetables, dried fruit, rice and beans. We saved the treats, chocolate, cookies, a bottle of wine, for special occasions. We celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and small victories. Tom's birthday was a highlight. We saved a bottle of wine and a few cookies. We sang, laughed, and toasted to survival. Despite the challenges, we found moments of joy. Lila drew pictures of the world above, of flowers and trees and blue skies. Julia taught her to read and write. Mark told stories of his travels. Sarah and Emma shared recipes. Tom played the harmonica. We held on to hope. We reminded ourselves that we were alive, that we had each other, that we could make it through. One evening, as we sat around the radio, we picked up a faint signal. It was a voice, weak but clear. A woman named Clara was broadcasting from a basement in a town 200 miles away. She told us about her family, about the heat, about the struggle to find water and food. We listened, spellbound as she described the world outside. The streets were empty, the buildings were scorched. The only sounds were the wind and the occasional cry of a bird that had somehow survived. Clara's broadcast became a regular event for us. Every night we tuned in, hoping to hear her voice. Sometimes she was joined by others, a man named Henry, a family with 2 children. They shared tips for survival, stories of hope, and messages of encouragement. We began broadcasting too. Every few days I'd turn on the radio and send out a message. I'd tell our story, share updates, and offer words of comfort to anyone who might be listening. One night, we heard a new voice, a young man named Jake. He was alone, holed up, in a subway tunnel beneath a ruined city. He told us about the people he'd lost, about the friends he'd buried, about the hope he still held on to. We listened, and we wept. But we also laughed. Jake had a sense of humor, even in the darkest times. He told jokes, sang songs, and reminded us that laughter was just as important as hope. Months turned into seasons. The world outside remained unchanged, hot, bright, and lifeless. Inside, we adapted. We grew vegetables in makeshift planters, using seeds we'd saved from the garden. We recycled water, filtered it, and made sure every drop counted. One day, Mark announced that we had enough supplies to last another year, maybe 2, if we were careful. It was a relief, but also a reminder of how long this might last. Lila grew taller. Julia taught her math, science, and history. Mark taught her about engineering and survival. Sarah and Emma taught her to cook. Tom taught her to play the harmonica. I taught her about storytelling. Max, our dog, grew older. He spent most of his days sleeping, but he was still a comforting presence. We celebrated holidays as best we could. On Christmas, we strung up lights and sang carols. On New Year's, we made resolutions to stay strong, to stay together, to never lose hope. But not every day was easy. There were arguments, moments of frustration, times when the weight of the world felt too heavy to bear. But we always found a way through. We talked, we listened, we forgave. One night, the radio picked up a new signal. It was faint, almost lost in the static, but we could just make out the words, "Help, please, anyone." We listened, hearts pounding, as the voice grew weaker. Then, silence. We never found out who it was, but that night, we held each other a little tighter. We reminded ourselves how lucky we were to be together, to be safe. Almost a year after we went underground, something strange happened. The temperature outside dropped, just a little, but enough to notice. The sky, which had been a dull gray for months, began to show hints of blue. We didn't dare hope at first. Maybe it was a fluke, a temporary break in the heat. But day after day, the temperature kept dropping. The air outside, though still hot, was no longer lethal. We debated what to do. Should we stay underground, safe and secure? Or should we risk going outside to see if the world had changed? Mark suggested we send someone out, just for a quick look. Tom volunteered. We prepared him as best we could, with water, a hat, and a radio. Tom stepped out into the world for the first time in a year. He was gone for hours. We waited, anxious, listening for his voice on the radio. Finally, he returned. He was exhausted, but smiling. The world outside was still hot, but not deadly. The sky was a pale blue. The air was dry, but breathable. The landscape was scorched, but here and there he saw signs of life, a few green shoots pushing through the ash. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was hope.
Over the next few weeks, we took turns going outside. We explored the ruins of our town, searching for supplies, for signs of other survivors. We found a few. People who had been hiding in basements, in caves, in subway tunnels. We shared our supplies, our stories, our hope. We began to rebuild, slowly, carefully. We planted seeds, tended gardens, and repaired what we could. The world was different now. The sky was still strange, the air still hot, but it was livable. We could breathe, we could walk, we could hope. We kept broadcasting, sharing our story with anyone who might be listening. We told them about the Dark Sky Protocol, about the year we spent underground, about the friends we'd lost and the friends we'd found. We reminded each other that we were not alone, that together we could survive anything. Now, here we are, years later. The world is still recovering. The sky is still not quite right. But we're alive. We're together. We're rebuilding. Lila is older now, almost a teenager. Julia is still teaching, though the school is just a few children gathered in a room. Mark, Sarah, Tom, and Emma are still with us, still helping, still hoping. Max is gone now. We buried him in the garden, under a tree we planted in his memory. We still broadcast. Every night, I turn on the radio and tell our story. I remind anyone who's listening that they're not alone, that hope is still alive, that together we can face anything. As the first year above ground drew to a close, the radio became more than just a lifeline. It became a beacon. We started receiving signals from farther away than ever before. Some nights, the static would clear just enough for us to hear voices from across the country, even from overseas. Most of the messages were brief, full of static and uncertainty, but every now and then, a voice would come through strong and clear. One night, a man named Victor broadcasted from a coastal city. He told us about the ocean, about how the water had changed, how the tides were unpredictable, and the fish were scarce. But he also told us about hope. He and a small group of survivors had built a raft from salvaged materials and were fishing in the cooler, deeper waters. He said they'd found a way to survive, even thrive, by working together. Another night, a woman named Priya spoke from a mountain village. She described how her community had sheltered in caves, how they'd learned to grow food in rocky soil, and how they'd kept their traditions alive by telling stories and singing songs. She reminded us that even in the darkest times, people find ways to connect, to create, and to remember who they are. We started a regular broadcast schedule. Every evening at sunset, though the sun still set late and rose early, we'd gather around the radio. Sometimes I'd tell a story. Sometimes Julia would read a poem. Lila would sing a song, or Mark would share a lesson about science or engineering. We'd listen to the voices from far away, and we'd send out our own messages of hope. One night, a new voice came through. It was a child, a girl named Mia. She was alone, hiding in a library in a ruined city. She told us about the books she'd read, about the stories that kept her company, about the hope she held onto. We listened, spellbound, as she described her world, a world of words and imagination, where anything was possible. We invited Mia to join our broadcast. She became a regular, sharing stories and songs, reminding us that even in the darkest times, there is light. The first winter after the Dark Sky Protocol was strange. The world was still warmer than it had been before, but the days grew shorter, the nights longer. The air was cooler, though never truly cold. The sky, which had been a constant gray, began to show hints of blue, and even, on rare occasions, white clouds. We celebrated the change. We planted winter crops, kale, spinach, carrots, and watched as they grew in the cooler air. We repaired our homes, built new shelters, and welcomed more survivors into our community. One day, a group of travelers arrived. They had come from the north, where the heat had been less intense. They told us about their journey, about the friends they'd lost, about the hope that had kept them going. We welcomed them with open arms, sharing our food, our stories, and our hope. The winter passed slowly. We spent our days working, our evenings gathered around the fire, telling stories, singing songs, and listening to the radio. We celebrated the holidays as best we could, with simple gifts, shared meals, and the company of friends. Lila grew taller, stronger, more confident. She started helping in the garden, cooking meals, and even teaching the younger children to read. Julia and I watched her with pride, amazed at how much she'd grown, how much she'd learned. Max was gone, but we still felt his presence. We planted a tree in his memory, and every now and then we'd sit beneath it, remembering the good times.
When spring arrived, the world began to change in ways we hadn't dared to hope for. The air was cooler, the sky clearer. The first green shoots pushed through the ash and rubble, and the birds returned, singing their songs of hope. We expanded our gardens, planting more crops, experimenting with new varieties. We built greenhouses from salvaged glass and plastic, creating spaces where plants could thrive even when the weather was unpredictable. We welcomed more survivors, families with children, elders with stories to tell, young people with energy and ideas. Our community grew, and with it, our hope. One day, a group of scientists arrived. They had been working in a secret lab, studying the changes in the atmosphere, trying to understand what had happened and how to fix it. They told us that the world was healing, slowly but surely. The sun's rays were less intense, the air less toxic. The future was uncertain, but there was reason to hope. We invited the scientists to join our community. They shared their knowledge, taught us about the environment, and helped us plan for the future. We started a school where children and adults alike could learn about science, history, and the arts. Lila became a student and a teacher, sharing her love of stories with the younger children. Julia and I watched with pride as she grew into a leader, a storyteller, a beacon of hope. Summer came, and with it, new challenges. The heat was still intense, but not as deadly as before. We learned to adapt, to work in the cooler hours of the eye, morning and evening, to rest in the shade during the hottest part of the day. We rebuilt our town, one building at a time. We repaired the school, the library, the community center. We built new homes for the growing number of survivors, using salvaged materials and new ideas. We started a market where people could trade goods and services. We shared food, tools, and stories. We celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and small victories. One day, a group of musicians arrived. They had traveled from the south, carrying instruments and songs. They joined our community, teaching us new melodies, new rhythms, new ways to express our hope and our joy. We started a choir, a band, a theater group. We performed plays, sang songs, and told stories. The arts became a vital part of our community, a way to heal, to connect, to remember who we were and who we could be. Lila joined the choir, singing with a voice that was clear and strong. Julia and I watched with pride as she performed, her face lit with joy. As fall arrived, we took time to remember those we had lost. We held a ceremony in the garden, beneath the tree we had planted for Max. We lit candles, shared stories, and sang songs. We remembered the friends and family who hadn't made it, the voices that had faded into static, the hope that had kept us going. We reminded ourselves that we were not alone, that we were part of something bigger, something enduring. We started a tradition of storytelling, where each person would share a memory, a lesson, or a hope for the future. We listened to the elders who told us about the world before, and to the children who dreamed of the world to come. Lila told a story about Max, about how he had always been there, wagging his tail, offering comfort, reminding us of the simple joys of life. Julia and I listened, our hearts full. We celebrated the harvest, sharing the fruits of our labor with the community. We baked bread, made jam, and shared meals around the fire. We gave thanks for the food, for the friends, for the hope that had carried us through.
As the year drew to a close, we gathered for a New Year's celebration. We lit fireworks, sang songs, and made resolutions. We promised to stay strong, to stay together, to never lose hope. We looked back on all we had survived, all we had learned, all we had built. We looked forward to the future, to the world we were creating, to the hope that still burned bright. I turned on the radio and sent out a message to anyone who might be listening. I told our story, shared our hope, and reminded everyone that they were not alone. I invited others to join us, to share their stories, to be part of the new world we were building. As the new year began, the world continued to change. The sky grew clearer, the air cooler, the land greener. The scars of the past were still visible, but life was returning, slowly but surely. We welcomed more survivors, more voices, more stories. We started a newspaper, a newsletter, a library. We collected books, songs, and memories, preserving them for the future. We taught the children about the world before, about the mistakes we had made, about the hope that had carried us through. We encouraged them to dream, to create, to build a better world. Lila became a leader among the children, organizing games, stories, and lessons. Julia and I watched with pride as she grew into a confident, compassionate young person. We kept broadcasting, sharing our story with anyone who might be listening. We listened to the voices from far away, the stories of survival, of hope, of renewal. We reminded each other that we were not alone, that together we could face anything. Now, as I sit here in the quiet of the evening, I think about all we have survived, all we have built, all we have learned. I think about the friends we have lost, the friends we have found, the hope that has carried us through. I think about Lila, about how much she has grown, about the future she will help to build. I think about Julia, about her strength, her kindness, her love. I think about Mark, Sarah, Tom, Emma, and all the others who have become family. I think about Max, about the joy he brought us, about the memories we still cherish. I think about the radio, about the voices we have heard, the stories we have shared, the hope we have sent out into the world. This is Richard Radio, signing off for now. Stay safe, stay strong, and keep listening. The world is changing, but hope endures.